Boldwood presents One More Day of Us, written by Shari Low and read by Helen McAlpine. On this trip we meet Moira Chiles, former pub, club and cruise ship crooner, has returned to her hometown of Glasgow and is ready to create the next chapter in her life, just as soon as she's decided what she wants that to be. Ollie Chiles, Moira's son, star of the global hit TV show The Clansman, all-round good guy, co-founder of a theatre school for underprivileged kids called the Moira Chiles Academy of Music and Drama, and yes, his mother is mortified that he named it after her. Jacinta McIntyre, Moira's lifelong closest friend, actress and wearer of floaty chiffon caftans. Nate Wilde, the first love of Moira's life, and the boyfriend she left back in Hong Kong in the 90s, a free spirit who dreamt of a life of travelling and surfing. Carina Lloyd, wife to Spencer, mother of Imogen and Erin, hostess extraordinaire, has lived as an expat in Asia for the last 3 decades of her impeccably curated life, but now based in Dubai. Spencer Lloyd, Carina's very suave husband, CEO of Lloyd Asia Trading, an international company with offices in several countries, dealing in global imports and exports. Ben Lloyd, Spencer's brother, and Carina's reliable, caring friend of 35 years, has lived in Hong Kong since the 90s, never married. Felicity Bateman, Carina's mother, setter of standards, believer in etiquette, snob. Lisa Dixon, long ago friend of Moira and Carina, divorced, mother of one daughter, Stevie, works in a care home for the elderly. Stevie Dixon, Lisa's daughter, named after Stevie Nicks. She has the blonde hair, the throaty voice, everything except the wild ways and the rock and roll lifestyle. Born and brought up in Ireland, she came to Glasgow to do her radiography degree and stayed. Now a radiographer in the emergency department at Glasgow Central Hospital. Caleb Henry, an AD nurse, Stevie's colleague and best mate since they both started work at Glasgow Central Hospital on the same day, straight from university. Kelly Clark, the third friend in their trio, a nurse on the elderly ward at the same hospital, and the kind of solid, loyal pal who can always be relied upon to help in a crisis. Gilda Clark, mum to Kelly and her 3 siblings, straight-talking, warm-hearted, and always happy for anyone to join her family for Sunday dinner. Has a special place in her heart for Stevie. Prologue. Moira. Rose Cottage, Wearbridge, Scotland, 1st of April 2025. Dear Lisa and Carina, I'm sending this letter to both of you, so that we're all on the same page, quite literally. And yes, I thought about sending an email, but since I've been asking Lisa for an email address for the last 10 years without success, seriously, Miss Technophobe, come join us in the 21st century. I'll stick to snail mail for now. How are you doing, my darlings? It's been a while. Hope you're both loving life and surviving all this middle-age rubbish that no bugger warned us about. My body seems to have entered its landslide era. I'm now considering putting flashlights on my nips so that they illuminate my feet when I'm walking down dark paths at night. Anyway, enough of my woes. Since we're apparently the only people on Earth who still communicate via letters, I send this missive with glad tidings. After 16 years, I've finally hung up my sea legs. Yes, I've left the world of the cruise line cabarets and returned to Glasgow to take up a post teaching music and theatre to aspiring teenage stars as part of a new project to give kids from deprived areas access to training in song, dance and drama. My Ollie is one of the driving forces behind it, and I couldn't be prouder. I'm already working there, getting everything ready for the grand opening, which should be early autumn. Which brings me to my second reason for writing. Chums, do you realise that this summer it will be exactly 35 years since we met in Hong Kong? July 1990. Oh my, what a time to be alive that was. And it did get me thinking. Aye, brace yourselves for this one. Now that I'm no longer constrained by my sea schedule and have developed an "if it, life's too short" attitude, that came with the landslide situation, the menopause and the arrival of a new credit card, I'm going to take a trip back to Hong Kong. I want to explore it again. I want the nostalgia, the memories, and I want to see if the 23-year-old me is still there, because Lord knows I lost her somewhere along the years. Here's the crunch part. I'd love some travel buddies, but there's no one I'd want to do this with other than the 2 friends for life I met there. So how about a wee trip down memory lane, ladies? Hong Kong, the 3 of us for 1 week in July. I know at first glance that seems crazy, but why not? It's been over 3 decades since I saw your faces in real life, so surely it's time for an encore. Let's do it. Let's just bloody do it. Lisa, I don't want to hear all the reasons it's not a good idea. And Carina, I couldn't care less if you already have glamorous plans with far more important people. The 20-something us deserves this, and the 50-something us deserve this even more. I've already looked into it, and here's my plan. The Harbour Lights Hotel, arriving 1st of July. Let's not go back and forwards on this because, well, I don't want to pressure you or guilt you into coming along. I'm going anyway. Whether you join me is your decision. All I'll add is that 35 years ago, the fates made our paths cross, and I'm just going to trust and hope that they'll do it again. So, my darlings, I'll sign off now. Sending you all my love, as always. Hope you're happy and healthy and kicking life's arse. And I hope I'll see you both soon. Love you until the band stops playing. Moira. Kiss, kiss, kiss. P.S. Here's my favourite photo of us just to remind you why this is a bloody brilliant idea. Kiss, kiss, kiss. Chapter 1. July 1990. Hong Kong. Moira Chiles. Jesus, it was bloody roasting. Moira wiped the sweat from her forehead with the hem of her t-shirt, hoping that allowing a slight breeze to go up her top would help stop the rivers of perspiration that were oozing from under her boobs. This bra was going to have to be boil-washed to get it clean again. It was brand new as well, straight out of Marks and Spencer's the weekend before. Her mum had insisted on the underwear shopping trip, extolling dark warnings that if the plane went down, or she was knocked over by a double-decker bus. Do they have double-decker buses there, Moira? Then at least her parents weren't going to have to suffer the indignity of identifying a 23-year-old body that was adorned in greying knickers or a bra that had seen better days. She'd only landed in Hong Kong a couple of hours ago, but she'd already realised that this was about as far from the lukewarm streets of a Glasgow summer as it was possible to get. It wasn't just the volume of people. Buchanan Street on the first day of the January sales was wall-to-wall folk, and there was a fair amount of jostling for position, especially when you got near the House of Fraser perfume department. No, this was different. The packed streets here came with noise and shops selling things she couldn't identify, under signs she couldn't read, and 100 different smells from food vendors and drains and traffic. She'd heard about something called humidity, but she couldn't even have imagined that it would feel like this. Her hair was now the size of her mother's rhododendron bush, and her lungs felt like they could explode at any minute from trying to catch her breath. It was chaos. Hot, sweaty, frantic, gob-smacking chaos. And Moira didn't think she'd ever felt more excited in her life. As directed by the woman from the talent agency, she'd got off the bus from Kai Tak Airport outside a big hotel on Nathan Road, and now she was following the next steps in the instructions. Walk about 100 yards down Nathan Road, going towards the harbour, then turn left into Middle Road, and the guest house is about 50 yards along the street on the left-hand side. It's just a doorway, so you'll have to ring the bell and someone will come and let you in, she'd said, as Moira had scribbled it all down on the back of a Rice Krispies box that she'd snatched from the middle of the breakfast table when the phone on the kitchen wall had rung only a week ago. Her mother hadn't been impressed by the vandalism of Snap, Crackle and Pop's image, or by the fact that Moira was contemplating travelling thousands of miles to a country they knew nothing about. Their family holidays had never taken them further than Benidorm, and even then they'd taken their own tea bags, bread, and 5 packets of chocolate digestives in case of emergencies. "It all sounds so dodgy, Moira," she'd fretted. "I mean, you hear about the things that go on when they lure these young women away from home." Her dad hadn't got involved in the discussion. Unless it concerned his work, the pub or the bookies, he tended to keep his opinions to himself. "Mum, it's a proper entertainment agency. I checked them out with Calvin, and he says they're all above board." Calvin was the talent agent she'd signed with back in Glasgow when she was still at college, and already booking singing gigs at weekends in pubs, clubs and theatres across the city. She'd done the panto at the King's Theatre in Glasgow's city centre 5 years in a row now, rising through the ranks from the chorus to the giddy stardom of an ugly sister in last year's Cinderella. She'd even auditioned and had a callback for a dream job playing Magenta in the new national touring production of the Rocky Horror Show. In the end, she hadn't won the role, but it was the closest she'd got to theatre stardom. She'd been in the depths of disappointment over that rejection when she'd been flicking through the job adverts in a stage magazine and spotted this opportunity. 6 months in Hong Kong with guaranteed work, singing 6 nights a week in a 5-star hotel. Flights and accommodation paid by the agency. Sounded like a huge, fabulous, glamorous adventure. But now, looking at the sign above the door, she was beginning to wonder if her mum had a point. The tatty wooden proclamation of the Kowloon Star Guest House wasn't filling her with confidence, and neither was the chipped paint on the doorframe, or the fact that the door appeared to have a large, boot-sized dent in it where it had, presumably, been kicked. Her first thought was, "Oh, bollocks." Her second thought was that, even if this accommodation was down there with the 7th circle of hell, she was going to tell her mother it was perfectly nice. Otherwise, there would be a middle-aged Glaswegian woman barreling down Nathan Road as soon as a flight could get her here. Moira rang the bell as directed, then waited, hoping that whoever came spoke English. She'd already sussed out that most people here did. When she'd gone to the library to fax in her application letter in response to the advert, she'd done a bit of research while she was there and learned that Hong Kong was currently a British colony, but it had already been agreed that it would be handed back to China in 1997. She'd then, on the advice of the librarian, taken out James Clavell's noble house, and well, that had sealed her decision to come. It had all seemed so glamorous and cosmopolitan. Clearly, that exotic glamour didn't extend to the kicked-in door that was opening in front of her now. "Hello," said a voice her mum would describe as pure posh. The girl was obviously English, about the same age as her, tall, the kind of thick, dark, flowy hair that shampoo adverts promised, but had yet to deliver to Moira's red, curly, rapidly expanding bob. "Hi," Moira replied. I think I'm booked in here. I'm with the Night Stars Talent Agency. Oh, dear God. Another victim. Are you vaccinated? Against what? Everything. Moira wasn't sure why that was important, or what her answer should be, so she shook her head. In that case, I hope you have travel insurance, because this place is a germ factory. With that, she stuck her hand out. I'm Carina, a fellow hostage of Night Stars Talent. There's still time for you to run. I can't. My lungs gave up working about 10 minutes ago. Moira shrugged, feeling the friction rash beginning to bubble under the damp straps of her bra. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. The other girl, what had she said her name was? Stood back to let her past, then followed her up a narrow, rickety staircase. At the top, there was a small reception desk with a wall of key slots behind it. If you bang on that bell for long enough, someone will appear with your key. You don't work here? Moira asked what she thought was a fairly reasonable question, but the other woman looked horrified by the suggestion. No, I only answered the door to make you stop ringing the bell. I was trying to sleep before I go to work. Oh, right. Sorry about that, Moira said to... She suddenly remembered the name. Carina, that was it. Oh, it's fine. Just a little hiccup and yet another day in paradise around here. Carina turned to go down a nearby corridor when another girl about their age came the other way and blocked her. Moira's eyes widened, and she thanked the universe for the third or fourth time that her mother wasn't here right now. Unlike Carina, this girl was short, with blonde, shaggy hair, and the fringe that was falling over her eyes was definitely a fire risk, given the cigarette that was hanging out of her mouth. But it was the Clash t-shirt, the tiny denim shorts, the leather Doc Martens and the bottle of beer in her hand that grabbed Moira's attention. Lisa, this is... Sorry, what was your name again? Posh Carina was asking her now. Moira, Carina repeated, completing that half of the introduction before going on. And Moira, this is Lisa. She's with Night Stars Talent too. There are loads of us here. It's like a cult, but without communal sex or free food. That made Lisa laugh as she lifted her beer bottle in greeting. Hi. Singer or musician? Moira didn't have much experience with accents, but she guessed Irish, then got distracted as she felt a very attractive rivulet of sweat run down her cheek. She quickly brushed it away. Singer. Me too. I'm in the Fleetwood Mac cover band over at the Harbour Lights Hotel with our princess here. She's Miss Fancy Fingers on the piano too, though, so we worship at her altar of talent. Moira watched as Carina responded to the teasing with a roll of her eyes and a snarky, I prefer you when you're 6 drinks down and close to comatose. For a second, Moira wondered if she was going to have to break up a domestic incident, but Lisa just grinned. Yeah, me too. Give me another few hours. Any further conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a guy who slid in behind the reception desk. Sorry. Delivery at the back door. He eyed Moira expectantly. You must be... He checked some kind of paperwork on the counter in front of him. Moira Chiles. British. Here with Night Stars Talent? Moira nodded, transfixed. What were the chances that Michael Hutchins from In Excess, one of her favourite bands in the whole wide world, had a part-time job in a dodgy hotel in Hong Kong? Slim. So this guy must just be his identical twin. I'm Nate, Australian. Here with no other job, so I'm forced to work in this cesspit. His smile revealed the most gorgeous white teeth she'd ever seen, and Moira felt her temperature go back up to where it had been a few minutes ago when she was outside in 90-degree heat. I'll just get your paperwork. Give me 2 minutes. Carina gave her a quick wave. I'm in room 19, just along here. If you need help, advice, or antibiotics. And I'm in 17 if you need beer or cigarettes, Lisa added, before they both headed off down the corridor, letting Moira turn her attention back to the guy in front of her, brain whirring to take all this in. This hotel was a dump. She hadn't even seen where she'd be singing yet, but that could be awful too. The city was way too hot and crowded, and far from home. And if this was an example of how her new agency treated their talent, then it could be an absolute nightmare. Maybe she should take the advice and run. Okay, they've already sent all the paperwork, so I just need your signature here, and you're good. If you definitely want to stay, that is. I'd say we're at about 50-50 with people doing a runner when they see this place. Moira could definitely understand why, and she could also hear her mother's voice telling her to run like the wind. However, it was only 6 months of her life, and she'd get paid to live her dreams, singing 6 nights a week in front of a live audience. And so far, she'd encountered a deeply sarcastic but apparently friendly piano-playing posh bird, a rock chick with a fondness for day drinking, and a guy who looked like Michael Hutchins and was so attractive he was making her soggy brass straps itch. She took the pen he was holding out to her. Where do I sign? June 2025. Glasgow. Moira. Moira Chiles stood in the middle of the newly soundproofed recording studio and opened her mouth to let the opening line from one of her favourite songs belt out from her somewhere deep inside her soul. Lulu's Shout had been in her repertoire for 40 years, since she'd started singing in bars and clubs at 18, and she still got a kick every time she sang that intro. Moira held the last note until a lovely man in a hard hat on the other side of the studio glass gave her a thumbs up. Testing the acoustics and the efficiency of the soundproofing today had been an absolute blast, especially as it worked both ways and gave her a merciful break from the relentless construction noise she'd been subjected to over the last few months. She couldn't remember the last day she didn't go home with the sound of a jackhammer reverberating in her brain. Not that she minded, because she loved every other thing about her new working environment. She adored the exposed stone bricks on the walls of the old church in what was commonly regarded as one of the more impoverished areas of Glasgow. She adored the incredible team of actors, musicians, admin staff, cleaners and construction workers who were grafting to turn it into an academy of music and drama, one that would give access to the arts and free classes to nurture talent in this part of the city. She even loved the cheeky young buggers who'd been hanging about these streets drinking and getting up to all sorts of mischief before they'd been offered their first jobs working with the building team.
Ma, you should come with a health warning. I think you just blew out my eardrums.
And she especially loved spending time with the man who'd just entered the studio and who was now coming towards her, his gorgeous grin already making her smile too. The very best thing about this new project was that her son, actor Ollie Chiles, was the biggest investor and one of the co-founders of this whole project. Moira had grown up just a couple of streets away from here, and she'd brought Ollie up here too, so this was personal for them both. Although his plan to call this place the Moira Chiles Academy of Music and Drama made her flush to her toes with embarrassment. She'd been trying to talk him out of it since he'd suggested it, mortified in case anyone thought she was blowing her own trumpet and becoming some kind of grandiose, self-promoting diva. "Don't mock my pipes, son. They've got us this far in life," she replied, laughing. It wasn't strictly true. She could only take credit for supporting Ollie until he got his big break. Everything else he'd achieved in life, the leading role on The Clansman, one of the biggest shows on worldwide TV, playing a Scottish warrior from bygone days, was all down to his own talent, his determination, and his good looks hadn't harmed his chances. He gave her a hug.
You're so right. I'm just in to say goodbye. I'm heading to the airport and back to LA. Need to go earn some bucks to pay for all this.
He was joking, but there was a hint of truth in there. Ollie had teamed up with her old friend and former agent, Calvin Fraser, to make this place a reality. Calvin had been her agent in her younger days, and then again in her 30s, right up until she'd gone off to sing for her supper on the cruise ships. He'd been a lifelong mentor for Ollie too, so when Calvin had the idea for the academy, her son had been happy to get on board. Ollie had put up the cash for the building and funded most of the renovation out of his own pocket, his way of giving back to the area he grew up in. He and Calvin had then recruited a squad of well-known faces in TV, film and music to help them raise a hefty sum for the day-to-day operational costs. The plan was to put on regular shows starring both the young students and the household name talents, with the aim of becoming self-funding. A lottery grant had helped too, and they'd also got an unexpected boost when they managed to get a documentary team on board to film the whole thing for Netflix. That would bring in revenue and give the centre the publicity it would need to keep going and raise more, at least for the foreseeable future. Thankfully, she hadn't encountered the film crew today. She made a point of avoiding them as much as possible, having no desire to see herself on screen or subject herself to public scrutiny. Her days of dreaming about TV stardom were long behind her. This was Ollie's world now.
I think I've got a barge pole lying around somewhere in case you see that ex of yours when you're over there,
Moira quipped. Ollie was in the process of divorcing his wife of 6 years, American actress Sienna Montgomery, after she'd been secretly filmed snogging one of her Broadway co-stars on a red-eye flight from New York to Los Angeles a few months back. Turned out they'd been having an affair for months. And not that Moira held a grudge. Actually, she definitely did bloody well hold a grudge, but she kept telling herself that this was for the best, because Sienna was a spoiled, entitled horror who'd grown up as the beautiful granddaughter and daughter of 2 generations of acting legends and become a Disney child star before turning to theatre in her 20s. Her upbringing and adult life revolved around deep wealth and shallow people. But of course, Ollie had been too smitten to see that when they were young, daft and falling in love. Thankfully, he'd now seen the light, and he knew he was far better off without her. He nodded thoughtfully.
Good to know. Might be tricky getting it in my hand luggage, though.
That cheeky megawatt grin and the twinkle in his eye was why he had one of the biggest fan clubs in the business. Apparently, he had over 50 million followers on the Instagrams. Not bad for someone who had always loved acting, but not the fame and attention that came with it.
Anyway, I just wanted to say goodbye, and I'll see you in a few weeks. I'll be back for the opening.
The launch was scheduled for September 1st, which was why she was squeezing in this week off now. Once the place was up and running, it would be all hands on deck for months to come.
When do you leave for Hong Kong?
He asked.
Day after tomorrow. You know, I couldn't be more excited, son. I still can't quite believe I'm going. I'm happy for you, Ma. You deserve this. Although, if you want to change your mind and come to LA with me instead...
On any other day, she'd have jumped at an offer to go hang out with her son, but not today. She'd been saving for this trip for months, and it was so much more than a holiday.
Me and my barge pole will definitely take you up on that, but not this time. Ask me again next time you're going. But give me a bit of notice so I can lose £50, get my roots done and my teeth whitened. Otherwise, they won't let me into LA. A wee facelift probably wouldn't go amiss either. Nope, you're perfect just the way you are,
he said, laughing as he hugged her again, blissfully unaware that she wasn't entirely joking. Decades of working long hours and late nights, stressing about money, taking care of her parents in their last years, juggling to keep all the plates of their lives spinning just in time for middle age and the bloody menopause to come along. It had all taken its toll, and she saw it every morning when she looked in the mirror. She remembered the days when her confidence was on the inside, in every bit of her, and not just part of the act she put on for the outside world. "And so are you, son," she replied, entirely serious now. This man made all the graft worthwhile, and she wouldn't change anything about the last 30 years if it meant she wouldn't be where they were now. "Safe travels, and remember to call your mother. I'm needy in my old age." "Will do, Ma. Love you." "Love you too. I'll see you soon." Off he went with a wave behind him, just as the studio technician's voice cut through the air. "Moira, we're all good," he relayed from the sound desk. "Construction are happy with the soundproofing and the acoustics. We're just going to break for lunch now." She gave him a thumbs up. "Thanks, Charlie." Moira picked up her water bottle, one of those ridiculously expensive posh Stanley cups that Ollie had bought her a few weeks ago. 50 quid. She could have got 10 water bottles for that at Home Bargains. Although, much as she'd objected on a point of principle and frugality, secretly she loved the baby blue container, and it hadn't left her side. Dodging joiners, electricians, and a load of other workers in the corridors, she made her way to the tiny room that the management team had commandeered as their staff room, office, eating area, and occasionally quiet space to have an afternoon nap if they curled up on the old battered sofa that sat against a wall between a mini fridge and a coat stand they'd found in a charity shop. After flicking on the kettle, she retrieved a ham sandwich from the fridge and a packet of cheese and onion crisps from her bag, then finished making a cuppa. She carried it all to the table in the middle of the room. Or rather, the old door that had been propped on a couple of wooden crates to form a makeshift eating space. It was a far cry from the 5-star cruise ships she'd worked on for the last 16 years. 5 days a week, 3 performances a day, an afternoon session in the lobby bar, a show in the theatre, and then a late-night croon in the piano bar. Her cabins were never up to much, but at least her contract had stipulated meals in the ship's restaurants, as opposed to the huge staff canteens in the bowels of the boats. On the outside, it seemed like such a glamorous job, but the truth was it was a grind. Groundhog Day. Up, eat, sing, bed, repeat. And there were few holidays and strict rules about not fraternising with guests, so even though she'd been friendly with other performers and crew members, it had been a pretty lonely existence. Still, she'd been grateful. The sad reality was that regular, decent jobs for singers of her age were few and far between. That's why she was now so delighted to be here, on home turf, with family and friends, starting a whole new chapter. "What are you smiling about, doll?" Jacinta, her lifelong pal, academy colleague and semi-retired actress, had wafted into the makeshift staff room, one of her ever-present ornate, floaty chiffon caftans trailing in the sawdust behind her. "I'm just thinking how happy I am to be back in Glasgow, with a full-time job here." "One that you're leaving for a week to go off gallivanting to Hong Kong," Jacinta pointed out, as she gracefully took a seat opposite Moira at the table. "You know, on that holiday I wasn't invited on," Jacinta drawled, topping it off with pursed lips of disapproval, while popping the lid off a Tupperware dish she'd brought with her, then fishing a plastic fork out of her caftan pocket. "It's okay. No reason you'd invite me, really. It's not like we're close. I'm only your best pal and trusted confidant of 30-odd years, so we barely know each other." The sarcasm oozed from every word. "You're right. Sometimes I wonder if I'd be able to pick you out in a police lineup." Moira deadpanned, refusing to bite, and at the same time cracking Jacinta's faux disdain and making her cackle. She leaned over and put her hand on Jacinta's arm.
My love, I'll miss you every day, and I'll bring you back the most over-the-top feast of a silk caftan you've ever seen.
Jacinta rolled her eyes.
Ugh, I'm so easily bribed. You're lucky to have me.
Much as they joked about it, Moira did feel a twinge of guilt that she hadn't invited her best friend, or her son, or anyone else from her current life. And that was deliberate, because just for 1 week, she didn't want to be Ollie's mum or Jacinta's age-old pal. She wanted to be the Moira Chiles who'd lived in Hong Kong at 23, who'd had a wild adventure with her friends there, ones that sadly she hadn't seen since then. The Moira she'd been before all her hopes and ambitions of stardom had been derailed a couple of years after she'd returned home, when a holiday romance in Tenerife had resulted in her gorgeous Ollie. Motherhood had brought duties, responsibilities and commitments. The dream of a life on the West End stage had been abandoned so that she could stay in Glasgow and be the best mother for her son. Not for 1 second did she regret it, but she'd gone from raising Ollie as a single mum for 16 years, while also taking care of her parents in their final years, to a life on cruises where someone else told her where to be and when to be there. It had all been so regimented. Everything done to a schedule, decisions made by other people. Now, in her late 50s, she was experiencing her first ever period of freedom. She was finally the only decision-maker in her life, and she didn't know what to do with herself. Over the last few months, working in the academy and creating something new and exciting had fueled her fire again. But it had also made her realise that, outside work, she had no idea what made her happy. She was looking forward to helping the young ones who would come here to make their dreams come true. But what were her dreams now? When it came to her personal life, she'd lost all her spirit, her boldness, her confidence, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd even contemplated a relationship, love, or even a casual fling with some bendy sex. Although she might have to work up to that because decades of shimmying on stage had played havoc with her knees. The reason she wasn't taking anyone from her present life was because she truly hoped that when she got to Hong Kong, she'd find the one person she'd lost touch with 35 years ago who could change all that. It was someone that Carina and Lisa knew well, so Moira had invited them along, fully aware that she needed all the help and encouragement she could get. Yes, now, knocking on the door of her 60s, she reckoned this was her last chance to track down the carefree, bold, ambitious, optimistic dreamer who had been 23-year-old Moira Chiles, the one who'd been so open to adventure, to risk, to dreams, and to love. And if Moira could find her younger self, then maybe she could remember how to live her life like all those things were still possible. Chapter 3. June 2025. Dubai. Carina Lloyd. The air was thick with the scent of the jasmine wafting in from the garden that Carina and her gardeners had spent 2 years cultivating. Even in the suffocating Dubai heat, her favourite place was her garden. But having the party out there wasn't even a possibility at this time of year. Instead, this was the compromise, an evening soiree on the air-conditioned terrace of their home, overlooking the beautiful landscaped grounds that led to their private beach on the Palm. Carina's gaze scanned the adjacent tables from her position at one end of the centre table, her smile never faltering, even when she spotted that the guests seated to her left hadn't yet been served their lobster starter. Without missing a beat, she subtly gestured to her house manager, who had long since learned that his job included keeping one eye on his employer at all times, then pointedly directed her gaze back to the other table. He saw the issue and immediately beetled off in the direction of the kitchen, where she had no doubt he'd have the situation remedied within seconds. Tonight was an intimate dinner party to celebrate the 34th anniversary of the day that she'd walked up the aisle into the waiting arms of Spencer Lloyd. Or at least it had started out as that, until her husband had, as always, invited a few key business contacts that he wanted to schmooze, impress or reward. The logistics of tonight's event and every other special occasion were Carina's department. The invitations, the food, the entertainment, and helping Spencer to woo potentially profitable clients all fell into Carina's field of responsibility, where they sat with her everyday responsibilities of their adult children, their home, and their staff. In Spencer's piece of the workload pie was his career and earning the income required to give them the life they'd enjoyed for every one of those 34 years together.
"You've done an amazing job as usual, Carrie,"
said the person to her left, the only one who ever shortened her name from Carina. "Thank you. And you're trying to make me feel better. As usual, Ben." Spencer wasn't the only man who'd become a permanent fixture in Carina's life after they met in the busy bar of a swanky Hong Kong hotel 35 years ago. She'd also gained a brother-in-law who'd become the dearest of friends. Moira and Lisa had been with her, and Spencer's brother Ben had been by his side that night. It was a life-changing moment, one that she had thought back to when the letter had arrived from Moira a couple of months ago, proposing they all meet up for a week to revisit their youth. It was a lovely idea, but Spencer had booked a trip to London for their anniversary, leaving tomorrow, 1st of July, causing a schedule clash that she couldn't get around. She'd meant to write back to Moira and explain, but she'd been caught up with organising tonight and it had completely slipped her mind. She'd do it tomorrow and send a note along with a gorgeous bouquet to the hotel. Moira would understand that she could hardly tell Spencer that she was unavailable for their anniversary celebration because she was going off gallivanting to Hong Kong. First thing on the list after she got back, though, was a visit to the UK to see Moira and Lisa. It was ridiculous that they hadn't managed to get together in all these years. But with Moira away on cruise ships, Lisa being reluctant to travel, and her being a full-time wife and mum, mostly in Asia, the time had just slipped by. Somehow, life with Spencer had always come first. Her eyes were drawn to her husband at the other end of the table, their daughter Imogen and her friend Arabella on one side of him, and two senators from Texas on the other. These men, she knew, were his main targets tonight. Something to do with new trade routes, but she hadn't delved into the details. She'd done her job. She'd greeted them when they arrived, charmed them, and now they were being wined, dined and entertained. Anything else was down to Spencer.
"Erin couldn't make it?"
Ben asked, and Carina's smile masked a wave of sadness that their younger daughter wasn't here to celebrate with them tonight. No, she's still in Shanghai. It's driving Spencer crazy, but she's stubborn. Ben took a sip of his champagne. It was Spencer's favourite Veuve Clicquot, then topped up her glass.
"I'll stop in her next time I'm over that way."
Ben still lived in Hong Kong, so Shanghai was only a short flight away. He was also free of ties, time constraints or family commitments because he'd never married. His choice. He'd had a couple of long-term relationships over the years, and Carina was rooting for him to meet someone just as kind, decent and lovely as he was. Ben put his glass back down on the white linen table cover.
"That kid is good for the soul. I bet she doesn't give a damn that she's pissing Spencer off."
For the first time tonight, Carina's smile was genuine. Not even a little bit. Erin was a law unto herself. Unlike Imogen, she genuinely didn't give a toss what her father thought about her, her life choices, or her decision to teach English in Shanghai instead of following her sister into the family business. Erin had always been drawn to Asia because that's where she'd spent most of her childhood. They'd lived in Hong Kong, Singapore, Beijing, Shanghai, moving every few years, as Spencer's role and the expansion of the business required him to set up offices and supply chains in each new location. And every time, Carina would pack up their lives and move them. New house, new school, new friends, new lives. She'd do it all with a smile on her face and a sympathetic shoulder for the kids, who invariably pushed back at leaving their lives, attributing half the blame and directing all of the resentment at Carina because she was the more present parent. Her determination to show a united front with Spencer left the girls unaware that it was never Carina's choice to move. She dreaded every relocation, hated the upheaval, but she'd put a smile on her face and got on with it. Wasn't that one of the responsibilities that still fell in her piece of that pie too? Smile and get on with it, hold it all together. The transient life had shaped both girls in very different ways. Erin was a free spirit who wanted no part of a traditional family life, whereas Imogen had been intoxicated by her father's success and the rewards that came with it. She'd joined Lloyd Asia Trading straight from university and would undoubtedly take over from Spencer and Ben one day. At least the kids were adults now, so she hadn't had to reorganise their lives when they'd relocated to Dubai from Singapore a couple of years ago. Once again, she hadn't wanted to move, but Spencer had promised her it would be the last time. Dubai had become a crucial location for his business, and Imogen had agreed. So Carina had called in the packers and made it happen. The ding of metal against glass interrupted her thoughts and took her attention to the source of the noise. At the other end of the table, Spencer was standing now, rapping his spoon against his vintage Stuart crystal champagne flute. Carina bristled, wanting to say that those glasses cost over £100 each, so would he please stop doing that?
"Ladies and gentlemen,"
he began, and Carina felt the sheer power of the way he so effortlessly commanded his audience. He was still the most handsome man in any room, well over 6 feet, his dark hair peppered with grey now, but it only made him look more distinguished. He worked out every morning at 5 a.m. with his personal trainer, and he'd recently started playing pickleball with Imogen and her friends after work. Add a Savile Row suit and skin that had been lightly bronzed by the Dubai sun, and he could overshadow and outsuave a man 20 years his junior. It was a standard that Carina worked hard to match. The duck lips of fillers and frozen foreheads of anti-wrinkle jabs weren't for her, but not a grey hair survived her monthly visit to the salon, and her face and body were kept youthful by weekly facials, daily yoga, and twice-weekly Pilates. She had accounts at Chanel, Prada and Valentino, and Spencer expected her to use them so that she was, at all times, the chic, elegant wife on his arm.
"First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate the anniversary of the day I married the beautiful lady at the other end of the table."
That evoked a round of applause that made Carina blush. The centre of attention wasn't a place that she'd craved or enjoyed for a long time now. When the room settled again, Spencer went on.
"And Carina, I'd like to thank you for being the core of our family for all these years."
Carina felt her face redden again, this time with a sudden flush of attraction that had been missing for the last few years. It was difficult to pinpoint exactly when the passion and the closeness had faded, or when the resentment she felt inside had begun to bubble and become impossible to ignore. Maybe around the time that the girls had left home, and she'd realised that they'd taken her identity and her purpose in life with them. All that was left was her service to Spencer, a life of arranging his dry cleaning, making sure his golf shoes were polished, managing their home, planning their trips, smiling as she hosted yet another dinner for his business associates, wondering if she could recall the last time she'd actually had fun. Of course, it had never been discussed. This was the life she had chosen, and it was too late to change it now. Smile and get on with it. Hold it all together.
And for your patience, and strength, and love.
Spencer was still speaking. Maybe it wasn't too late to get things back to the way they once were. Perhaps she just had to give herself a shake. Weren't these things cyclical? Didn't all marriages go through ups and downs?
And for being so great at spending my money.
A titter of laughter reverberated around the room, and Carina fought with every ounce of discipline she possessed to keep smiling at the joke that had very obviously amused Spencer. Spencer, the man who only ever travelled first class, who thought nothing of dropping 10 grand on a watch, or hospitality at a Grand Prix, or a fricking dinner at Nobu. And he was saying she spent his money? Prick, Ben hissed under his breath.
No, but seriously, Carina, thank you for my family, and for the wonderful 34 years you've given me. To Carina.
He raised his glass.
To Carina.
Everyone echoed, joining the toast.
To Carina,
Ben said beside her. He was the only one she believed. Smile and get on with it. Hold it all together. Carina somehow managed to keep up the facade of the perfect hostess until dinner was over, and it was time to bridge the half-hour gap between the string quartet that had just finished and the evening DJ who was currently setting up in the corner of the room that the string quartet had just vacated. When she'd run through the details of tonight with her husband, Spencer had suggested that she play piano for her guests during the crossover between acts. Carina had been reluctant. Her love for music had never wavered, but her inclination to share it with the world had lessened with every passing year. Her music was her safe space, her refuge, the place that soothed her soul, where she could still feel emotions like passion and tenderness and belonging. But of course, Spencer had coaxed her to play tonight, as always. It was all part of the image he wanted to portray. His beautiful wife was talented too, and weren't they just perfect? That's why he was now standing beside her, his hand outstretched towards hers.
Darling, are you ready to entertain our guests?
No, she wasn't. In her head, she was screaming a rebuttal to his jibe about spending his money, and all the resentments were in full flow, reminding him that she'd raised his kids, run his house, and facilitated his whole life. But of course, she kept that inside. The only thing worse than having a husband make cheap jokes at her expense would be to make a scene. Her toes curled inside her Louboutin sandals at the very thought of that. They'd been a gift from Spencer for their 23rd anniversary. Or was it 24th? She couldn't remember, but it was back in the days when they truly enjoyed spoiling each other and celebrating their love. This year, he'd bought her the large, diamond-studded gold bangle that was on her wrist. And not to be ungrateful, but it wasn't her style. Too showy, too flash, too gaudy. He'd had his secretary deliver it this afternoon, so of course she'd worn it tonight to make him happy. Reaching out, she accepted his hand, and he walked her over to the grand piano in the centre of the terrace. Her performing days were long behind her, but she still knew how to entertain an audience. This wasn't a classical music crowd, so she kicked off with a Beatles medley. Carina had never had Moira's raucous power vocals or Lisa's sexy, intoxicating tone, but her voice was clear and pitch-perfect as she encouraged everyone to join in. Imogen was the first to oblige. Both her daughters had gorgeous singing voices, and they'd spent endless days of their childhood at the piano, but neither had any interest in making music their career. Those memories faded into the background right now because, as always, Carina got lost in the music, feeling each word of the lyrics, each emotion of the melody as the Beatles merged into Oasis, which then went into a bit of Coldplay and Snow Patrol before a Motown compilation rounded off her set. After the last bars of superstition, she stood and took a bow to rapturous applause. Imogen, so tall and confident like her father, came towards her for a hug. "That was amazing, Mum," she whispered, and Carina felt a very uncharacteristic swell of pride. Maybe taking centre stage again every once in a while wasn't so bad after all. Over her daughter's shoulder, she glanced around for Spencer to see his reaction. No sign of him, probably buttering up the senators somewhere. Catching the eye of the DG, who was now